Welcome to Film Strip. These podcasts are spoiler-filled as we discuss the plots, characters, and themes of the films in review. All content used or discussed in these podcast episodes is the property of the respective owners and used under the Fair Use Act, Section 504(c)(2), Title 17.
Welcome to Film Strip. I'm Jay.
I'm Ron.
I'm Cory.
And this is our review of The Wolf of Snow Hollow, starring Jim Cummings, Ricky Lindholm, Chloe East, Jimmy Tatro, and Robert Forster. Written and directed by Jim Cummings, released in 2020 to theaters and video on demand simultaneously on a $2 million budget. Cory, welcome back to Film Strip.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Tell folks a little bit about yourself and your podcast and writing.
Well, I am a teen horror blogger. I run the blog gorycory.com. I'm a teen correspondent for Fangoria magazine, and I am the co-host of the Scream Teens podcast, where we talk about Gen Z and horror films and kind of our connection to horror.
Awesome stuff. Go to gorycory.com. The link is in the podcast description because this is your idea. So we were talking about this and kind of outtakes from when you and Anthony from Tis the Podcast and I were recording the Scream 2022 review back in January. And, you know, it was time to finally tackle a big subject in the horror genre that we somehow not covered a lot of, and that's werewolves, with one notable exception. If you go all the way back to 2012 and episode 57, you can listen to Nick and I tear Stephen King's Silver Bullet limb from limb. And so, because that is a bad movie, but a fun one. And we both rated it as such. But yeah, we haven't done werewolves on this podcast much at all.
Why not?
So that is the magic question. I don't know. I think I don't remember exactly what I said on that show, but I never was. It wasn't that I was anti-werewolf. I just didn't gravitate toward those movies.
There aren't a lot of werewolf movies. The genre has kind of fallen off. Yeah.
I mean, I think the most famous one that in my lifetime was An American Werewolf in London.
Yeah, definitely.
Which I didn't see up until just a few years ago, and so I missed that one along the way. But Cory, what's your background with werewolves in movies, and also why did you pick this movie for us to review?
Okay, so werewolves were definitely like one of my biggest introductions to horror. I was obsessed with them as a kid. I really liked Scooby-Doo, and so I really liked the werewolf episodes in there. And then I had this Alvin and the Chipmunks DVD that they met the Wolfman, and I was obsessed with it. So it was like kindergarten. I was obsessed with werewolves. And then, you know, Disney Channel had werewolves and like Wizards of Waverly Place, and Nickelodeon had this movie called The Girl Who Cried Werewolf. So I got a lot of werewolf content as a kid. Monster High had a lot of werewolves. So I've always really, really loved werewolves. In 2020, when this movie came out, I was so excited to watch it because I hadn't been able to see a werewolf movie, like a new one, in so long. And Fangoria recommended it, and I was like, absolutely, I will watch anything you tell me to. And I thought about it because Jim Cummings, the director and the star of it, he's an alum from my school, Emerson, and they're doing like a screening of it in a week. So I was like, let's do this.
Well, that's awesome. So you actually get to hear him and hear him talk about this.
It's going to be so cool. I can't wait.
That's going to be fun. I shall be following your Twitter account and getting play-by-play of that.
Yeah.
Because that is awesome. Now, Ron, you know, everyone knows you ran like a Ginger Snaps fan site for a long time, but what's your other background with werewolves? That's a joke, but Ron's been after me to do that movie for years.
Oh my God, why haven't you?
Again.
I've been after Jay to do Ginger Snaps for a long, long time. I'm stunned that he hasn't seen American Werewolf in London until recently. Have you seen The Howling, at least?
I've seen The Howling. Yeah.
Okay. Because, like Cory, I am a fan of werewolves from way back. Of course, my way back was probably before she was born. But one of the first shows that they had on the Fox network was a show about a dude who was a werewolf. And he got the pentagram in his palm. And just like... I just remember the opening of the first episode of the show was like these people like making out in the car, and then all of a sudden you hear the claws like on the top of the car and the scrape, and then he just like rips the door off and drives the guy out and chucks him and does terrible werewolf things. I just remember that really vividly, and I was like, all right, I like hairy monsters, and I grew up to be one, so it's fitting that's just kind of how my life has turned out.
Yeah, you know, I'll say this about the werewolf content stuff. Like, obviously, there's a big werewolf character or two in the Buffyverse, and so you know, lived through that when Brian and I were reviewing that show. So there's that into things. And then, I don't know if you count Teen Wolf or not. I mean, I watched that movie a ton growing up because Michael J. Fox was, like in my area, that's just what we did. He was a big star, as a kid for me. And so anything he was in, I watched. I've even seen Teen Wolf 2 a couple of times, sad to say. And then Cory, you and I've talked about, like, we both liked the Teen Wolf MTV TV show.
I love MTV Teen Wolf.
Yeah, and Ron, I think you even covered that for Den of Geek.
Yeah, I covered Teen Wolf for Den of Geek for like 5 seasons-ish.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
So I'm not averse to them. I've just never watched a lot of movies with werewolves in them. In fact, I think I've named the 3 that I've seen besides this one, if we don't count Teen Wolf. And if we do we'll count that as 4. So it's just one of those like glaring pieces. I don't know. I didn't, it wasn't that I was, again, averse to them. I just didn't buy them. Now, I will say this, back when we did the Nightmare on Elm Street retrospective and we got to Nightmare on Elm Street 2. I've often said that Nightmare on Elm Street 2 is best understood if you go watch the Michael Landon 1950s movie, I Was a Teenage Werewolf, and then you watch that right after it, you get a completely different appreciation for that movie. Because I think that's what they were going for, among other things, in that movie. And so I think it's a genre, like you say, that doesn't get a lot of attention. And so when you brought this up, I said, oh, yeah. And I just watched the trailer for it on YouTube. And I was like, oh, yeah, this is going to be good. Like, I recognized a couple of these people. I wish I thought, I know Jim Cummings from things. And what I realized is, no, I only know him from Halloween Kills. Like, I don't know any of his stuff. He just has a face that I think I should know.
I think he's probably done a lot more, like, coverage and stuff for a lot of horror movies. He's definitely been in the community for a long time.
Yeah. But I liked his energy. And it gets in that trailer. And then they were like, I was like, Robert Forster, it's his last thing. Okay, I'm down for that. And I just had to Google. I was like, how did you get Robert Forster to do this? And Jim Cummings tells the story like, we expected a very polite no, but apparently Robert Forster really got into the whole like father-son dynamic. And I was like, awesome. How sweet. So I was down for it for that. And I thought, okay, well, this will be different. And it's a different experience, this movie, than what I expected. So that'll be a good beginning into it. But yeah, I didn't know anything about this. Wouldn't have known it if you hadn't mentioned it, Cory. So I think it's cool you're going to get to hear him talk about it, though.
Oh, I'm so excited. I can't wait.
I'm really interested in his thought process, and I hope we can get a good play-by-play from you when
definitely.
you cover that. Because
I will write it all down.
I'm fascinated with how his mind works, being he's the writer, director, producer, star. This movie is totally really weird to me.
It's really unique, and his really writing style and directing style, like it just doesn't seem like it should work, but it does. It's really interesting.
Yeah, that's a good way of saying it. Like, there's so much about this that I was surprised that, like, oh, we're doing that, and I'm like, is that going to work? And then I was like, it kind of does. I mean, it's sort of. I was trying to describe this for a friend who knew we were recording this, and he said, "What was the movie about?" And I said, "Well, I don't want to spoil it. You should go watch it." And he said, "Well, what's the style?" And I was like, kind of this Coen Brothers meets this Jim Carrey horror movie sort of thing, and there's a lot of snow. He was like, okay.
There's a werewolf, but there isn't a werewolf.
I was like, there's kind of this wolf action. I said, you just need to see it. There's a tall person. It's weird. It's Utah. So it's kind of like this whole, like I said, it's this sort of Coen Brothers, Raising Arizona, Fargo kind of world, but slammed into the town from Silver Bullet that is not run by drunks or whiny children. So I mean that's really all I know to say. Or Corey Haim, either or. So it's I guess we should do the plot summary. I'm gonna try to keep this real high level because again, there's a lot that goes on. We'll get into it as we go, but Jim Cummings plays Officer John Marshall, and he's cracking under the pressure. He's a recovering alcoholic. He's trying to cover for his ailing father, the sheriff, played by Robert Forster. He's trying to keep up with his teenage daughter, who hates him for reasons. And he's dealing with all the other nincompoops who run the Snow Hollow Police Department, including himself. These may be the worst cops ever, next to like Brooklyn 911 and Reno 911. Standing by his side, though, is loyal fellow deputy Julia Robson, who may actually be the only competent person in the movie or in the whole town, maybe in the whole state, played by Ricky Lindholm. Complicating matters is a series of grisly murders, which the media and some of his compadres speculate are the work of a werewolf. This makes John very angry, and his anger flashes at very inopportune times. It strains relationships in the town with his family and even caused him to fall off the wagon. And we even see a few of these attacks, and there appears to be an actual werewolf, really tall one involved. But however, turns out John is right all along. There is no werewolf. Instead, it's a taxidermist named Paul, who I thought was Paul Shearer on stilts, and we'll get to that in a minute. Yeah, he dresses up as a wolf, bear, man, bear, pig costume thing, and uses a variety of cutting tools to commit the murders. Why? Who knows? John just figures this out through some drop lines and some clues and several misadventures and having a conversation with the taxidermist while returning some evidence, who eventually attacks him, but Julie arrives and shoots Paul before an injured John finishes him off, shooting him in the face a bunch. John heals from his attack, and he and Julia take his daughter to college, where John sighs, frustrated from the wolves that are on campus. But he takes comfort in knowing he's equipped his daughter with protection, condoms, and her grandfather's service pistol as credits roll. And that's about the best way I can walk us through this thing. It's not a real linear movie, and I think that's one of the things to talk about in the movie is that it cuts back and forth all the time. It's got all these sort of interesting asides, and it's a whole aesthetic, this whole flick.
It's because it's a really weird mix of like that kind of Jim Jarmusch deadpan comedy of absurdity, but then there's these surprisingly strong emotional scenes. I mean, maybe it hit differently for me because it hits a lot of the things that tweak me, especially this time of year. But it's really an interesting gumbo of a movie.
Yeah, it is a gumbo. And Jim Cummings himself is giving a gumbo performance. I mean, he is like Nicolas Cage, and I'm not talking about like modern Nicolas Cage, but sort of old school Cage and a little bit of Jim Carrey, but mixed with like Tom Atkins a little bit without the mustache. Like that's the vibe I got off of it.
Yeah, totally. Well, and it's such an interesting role too, because he has to balance out all this like comedy, but also this really intense anger and how stressed he is. And so there are so many moments where he just like flips and gets so angry, and it's really interesting.
Yeah, we should say like he gets into fistfights with other officers. He's the worst person at the staff meeting. I mean, and him and his daughter have a whole like fight on the side of the road where he's shooting up at a werewolf, and she's making out with her boyfriend. I mean, there's all kinds of just stuff. But like you say, all the people in this movie though have that quirkiness to them. And you kind of get that from the get-go. And the one thing I'll say about this, and this is, I think, a credit to his writing, is he balances out all of this quirky dialogue and these kind of off-kilter personalities with some gorgeous cinematography. Like the way this movie is shot, it looks great. The fact that they did this for $2 million, it's
I don't know how they did that. Yeah, it's incredible.
Yeah, this movie looks amazing.
Yeah, I mean, there's some deep crane shots looking down on the snow, and I mean, you just get this sort of starkness of this place, and it's a fictional place, and I've spent very little time out west like that, but it's gorgeous, looking like this. I almost wanted to message our friend Michael Scott, go like, "Is this what this place looks like?" By the way, you need to see this movie. But I mean, I may do that, after we're done. But I mean, really, like it's just gorgeous mountains. That one of my friends who does sports broadcasting, his favorite place to go do games is where Utah State is, because their stadium has the most gorgeous view, and he has it like on his Twitter account, and it's just a beautiful view. And I can see why. Like, it's easy to get lost in all of that stuff. And I've also always thought like snow and blood are a great cinematic mix, because it's such a contrast, right?
Yeah, and that scene, especially with I think it was the ski instructor, where she's getting murdered, is like all of the scenes where the wolf is killing people are so intense, and they just look so terrifying on that snow. He really takes advantage of it. Like he just makes it look so perfect.
Yeah, I mean, we open up with the Airbnb from hell, and the couple that's trying to get away from the weekend, and they are out to eat, and they kind of get into it with a couple of locals. This movie should be called The Wolf of Red Herring of Snow Hollow, because there's lots of those in this, and including, who's the guy with the tattoo burning the brush pile, by the way? Just remind me of that, because I got questions. But they are doing this, and then they're making out in the hot tub, because that's what you do. And no, it's not really what you should do, by the way. It's not very hygienic, but it's what you do in movies. And of course, he gets out to go, prepare, and she gets murdered, and he comes out and finds her corpse. And I mean, it's a startling jump. The way, like, the first 10 minutes of this are just sort of okay, is this a comedy? Like, what's going on? And then all of a sudden, it's just this gore factory happening right in front of us.
Yeah, you're kind of like smirking along and chuckling, and then all of a sudden it becomes like a scene from Hannibal. There's just like pieces and blood everywhere.
Yeah.
That's like exactly the tone of this movie, though, because so much of it is so funny, and you're sitting there laughing, and then immediately someone dies.
Yeah, and they die in these horrific ways. I mean, the descriptions that they go through and all that stuff, it is very Hannibal. And I mean, like Hannibal, the TV show, I think it's what you're referencing, Ron. And yeah, very much just out of nowhere, this stuff. And you've got, we see our killer in the opening scene. That's the funny thing about a movie like this is if you go back and watch it again, you realize the clues are dropped for you all the way because there's no knives or anything in this Airbnb. And it's because the guy who owns it is the taxidermist who's perpetrating all this. And he's removed all the weapons, presumably because he's using all of them, but there's nothing to fight back with. And I was like, oh, that's actually really smart. And that's when I realized, because I went through this twice, because I watched this movie and I was like, okay, I got to make sure I got this. And it's only 84 minutes, which is really only like 75. So I just watched it again and I thought, okay, this makes so much more sense the second time through. Because the thing about a whodunit is if it's any good, you even knowing how it works out, it's fun to go back and rewatch them to see like, oh, did they drop clues? Did they tell me too much? And they lay it out like it's really well weaved. And I got to give Jim Cummings some credit for that because lesser movies have tried to do that and failed at it. And he really does a good job of balancing all that.
Absolutely. Yeah, he's really smart with that. And I think the whole movie, the first time I watched it, even the second time around, I just did not know who did it. Like I could not figure it out.
Yeah, it's really well crafted and it's really thoughtfully put together from a script standpoint in that he's weaving these little clues in so that on second watch and on third watch you see more things than you did on the first watch. But even when you watch it on first watch, it still ties together well.
Yeah, I mean, there's all those scenes at the different funerals that he's at, and of course, John can't sit still, and you're paying attention to him. But if you look in the background, you see it just gets clearer and clearer that the taxidermist is at every one of the funerals too, and he gets more in focus. And I'm like, that's like some smart stuff right there. Like that's Paul Thomas Anderson stuff right there that lesser filmmakers don't do and don't bother with. That's where it's also where I kind of felt like Coen brothers. I'm like, oh, I feel like I'm watching Blood Simple again, which I think is a heavy influence on this movie, like in a major way.
Yeah.
That's a good catch, Jay. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you can feel it too. And but I like that because it's mixing that with also like the humor level of something again, like Me, Myself and Irene, because there's times when Jim Cummings is definitely doing a Jim Carrey riff and like the good Jim Carrey riff. And I'm laughing and I was like, did they cross paths somewhere? Is this just sort of him doing stuff? But I really got a kick out of Hugh's humor and the way that it works and the way he interacts with everybody else too. And that's the other thing is that the ensemble cast, the rest of the cops and stuff, I think I aptly described them. They are all nincompoops. Like they are just
crazy.
They are
They're so out of nowhere.
Yeah, they're all the most bumbling cops. It's almost out of a Marx Brothers thing, Ron.
Yeah. Well, and he could have really. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say they reminded me a lot of a serious version of the cops from Super Troopers. If those guys were in a grounded world.
Yeah.
Be these kind of shenanigans.
Yeah, and I feel like he really could have like leaned into making them just like the dumb, incompetent cops, but he didn't necessarily. Like he could have used that and milked that for more humor, but he didn't. He made it really serious at the same time and very, very stressful for John, and you could see how much it was bothering him.
I think one of the things that aids this is it's got people in it that you recognize some of them, but some of them you don't know from anything really. And that makes them sort of meld into whatever role they are, but they play so real. They seem so lived in, like when he's having that argument with the one officer about like, you should have stuck to computer science because you're clearly very bad at being a police officer. And they're doing all that stuff. I got a real kick out of that. I was like, you can tell like these guys probably were, I don't know, track rivals in high school or some nonsense, like there's history here that it's hard to layer into a movie that's this short and this cheap and this small, but it's a credit to the way that it all plays out and there's all the side characters too his ex-wife, and that's straight out of a Coen Brothers movie. That whole diner interaction thing there, that's wackadoo.
And they all feel like very specific characters. They don't feel like tropes. They don't feel like tropes.
No.
They feel like three-dimensional characters. And the one thing you can say about a movie like this is that to write it well doesn't cost you anything extra in the budget. It just costs time and effort. And it's clear that Cummings put a lot of time and a lot of effort into this script, into making these characters feel something more rounded than they could have easily been. He could have gone for the broader, funnier stuff, because you've got some really funny comedic actors in there. Specifically, I'm thinking of Ricky Lindholm, who's really funny in a lot of stuff. Mm-hmm. And my favorite part of the show, Another Period, which is a great show, or was a great show, but he doesn't lean on them to go too broad, but he's confident enough in the performers that he's got, in the script that he's got, that it can be funny without sweating, so to speak.
Yeah. No, that's exactly right. Yeah. No, I think it's a great collection of folks. And as we kind of bounce through the different pieces here and everything kind of weaves in and out, you get to see this guy again, just sort of cracking at the seams the whole way through. And what did y'all think about him, and like all the way that it just sort of, everything just jumps from scene to scene to scene. There's not a lot of transition. Like we just sort of go from crime scene to AA meeting to staring at the wall in my office to bad staff meeting. Like there's a lot of just in and out that sort of keeps you on your toes.
I really liked that. And I thought it was a great kind of representation of his mental state, because especially when you're like, if you're going through that much stuff, or if you're really mentally ill or an alcoholic, like stuff happens in moments. Like you don't necessarily remember going places, but you remember the things that are happening at a moment. And so I thought that was really interesting and a really cool way to portray kind of what he was going through at the time. And I also really liked all of the takes on like toxic masculinity that he was showcasing and his dad was showcasing. Thought it was really interesting.
Yeah, let's talk about Robert Forster. I mean, literally hanging on by a thread here. You're giving it everything he's left that he's got in this. And that's the like trope of his character, is they're all sort of covering for him, particularly John, to just try to get him through the end of, the term or whatever, so that he can retire. And I'm like, man, he could have retired a long time ago. Like, what is this guy doing? Like, but I think you're onto something, Cory. That's supposed to be saying something to us, right? Because the only competent person is the other woman in the room.
Yeah. And it's like, he's too proud to quit. And it's like, please, we all just want you to not be here. Like, none of us, you're not helping anyone. But it was so annoying to watch, but it really did kind of, I really enjoyed that. And I thought their father-son dynamic was really interesting, with how he had to keep covering up for him. And yeah, I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, that was they had a really good relationship. It felt like the two performers played off of each other really well. Mm-hmm. And part of that is because it's Robert Forster. He was a living legend. He'd been in all kinds of stuff and had been acting for decades by this point. And he really knows this stuff. He's really good at this role where he's fighting off irrelevancy, so to speak. Mm. And having worked in a couple situations where the boss has hung on a little bit too long, or the boss has been having health problems, and someone else, usually me, had to cover for them, I can empathize with the Jim Cummings character with the son. But having also lost my own father, I could empathize a lot with his concern about his dad's health, his concern about, the deterioration of his father, and the extra layer of stress that kind of puts on you. Although my dad wasn't a slow death, my dad was a pretty sudden death, but it was like a rough 2 weeks.
Yeah, I mean, but still, you're right. When you've lived that and seen that, it's something that you can tie into, and it makes, again, what could just be a cheap horror comedy, but it gives it so much more depth. And I think that's what we're talking about, is that this movie has a lot of depth to it.
Yeah, I think both his relationship with his dad and his relationship with his daughter are very clear, like emotional points where you can really see more depth in his character, and you can see just how much stress he's under and how badly he wants to just do well for them and help them, but he simply can't, and it's really heartbreaking.
But as someone who's also kind of a stress junkie and stuff, I can say this from whence I know. John is also the cause of most of his own stress.
Yeah.
He does stress. You stretch yourself out too. Like he causes his own problems. And sometimes that's it's your own process, is that I have to create a fire because I'm good at putting them out. You know, and that's sort of him. And I don't know, I got a kick out of that because all of that is happening as we get in between the, you know, the kills. Like we have the girl killed in the beginning, and then we have the ski instructor girl that gets killed. And we get to see her do like the whole pizza French fries bit on the snowboard earlier, which is fun. And when they show her do that scene, I'm like, well, she's clearly the next victim. Like they're setting this up. They're playing along those lines. But the way she goes down, man, I mean, that's a pretty brutal fight, and that is a long sequence of that thing attacking her.
Yeah, the kills in this movie are so good for that reason. I mean, he really dragged that one out, but it was so, I think, worth it because you really see how brutal the murderers really are. And I also really like the scene before she gets murdered where we see like her see the guy, and you can kind of see him like stand up as he's watching her, and you can see how uncomfortable she is and how she knows something is wrong. That was so real to me because I've been in so many of those situations, and I was like, this is too close to home. Like it was really good.
Yeah, we need to talk about Will Madden, who plays the Paul taxidermy character. That dude is freakishly tall. Like he is, and like in Hollywood, tall, you know, can just be 6'3". This dude is really tall. Like when he stretches out, I'm like, ooh, it's Manute Bol, but really white. I mean, he is, like I said, when I looked at him, I was like, is that Paul Scheer? Because he looks like him, but it's not. And he is so. This the thing about tall, lanky character actors and things. I mean, the guy that they got to play the original Alien, the Ridley Scott Alien, like they hired the guy simply because he was so tall, and the way he lumbered around, it looked alien. It looked freakish to him. And this guy is so creepy. Like in all the scenes he's in.
He's only 6 feet tall.
Yeah, he's only 6 feet.
Really?
He's shorter than I am.
Oh my.
Jim Cummings is just that good of a director that he made him look that.
Well, okay, that's even better because I did not know that.
Let's give a lot of credit to Will Madden's body language.
Yeah,
and the way they shoot him. They shoot him a lot from up, so he looks taller. And every time you see him, he's hunched over. He's pulled in on himself, and then so when he stretches and like stretches out, it's much more impressive, especially when you kind of shoot upwards a little bit and kind of emphasize the change. It's almost like it reminds me a lot of like if you watch the original Superman and the Superman movies with Christopher Reeve, how Clark Kent's kind of stooped and nerdy, and then when Superman comes, you just see him like tilt his chin back and drop his shoulders back, and it's a very subtle body language change for Christopher Reeves, and it's a very big body language change for Will Madden that really makes it seem like he's like Angus Scrimtall.
Okay, see, yeah, that's exactly what I thought. I didn't know he was only 6 feet tall. I'm sitting there going, like, did they find an Angus Grimm
did they
type?
find like a 7 foot person? No.
That's awesome. Well, okay, then it is in the body language again, because there's other people I talked about, like their size gave them that, but he's just doing that. That's really well done. Then I'm even more impressed now. That is wild. So what did y'all think about that though? Like the attacks, the fact that they show us multiple times this wolf type character, and they go through all the, there's bite marks and claws and all this stuff, and it's doing genital mutilation and all just the gross stuff. But all the fact that the movie bothered to show us this thing that isn't there. I mean, it's not real. It's just what the guy does.
I really enjoyed that. That's actually one of my favorite parts of the movie, is kind of how it faked out having a real werewolf, and then at the end you're like, wait, hold on, what? Because it really did it. I think he mentions this, or maybe this is just something I read, but how werewolves kind of were like an excuse for men that attacked women, and then they'd be like, oh, a beast did it, a wolf did it, like a man would never do this. but they would, obviously. And I think that was a really great parallel that showed that. And I think it was a really great way to showcase that, because the whole time you're like, it's a werewolf. He can't control it. He's a werewolf. It's, whatever. But then you see that it's just some dude and you're like, holy crap, it is. Like, a human could absolutely do this to another human. And I don't know, it was a really great portrayal of kind of the violence against women and how it can often be covered up because people don't really want to accept that it's a man.
Like the one thing that dawned on me watching it was I realized I was like, okay, this probably isn't going to be a werewolf. It's going to turn out to be a person or something like that. And I really thought it was going to be John. I was like, what they're telling us is that all his anger issues, he has these sort of blackout moments and he snaps and he just, he goes on these killing sprees. And because the other, again, this is my horror trope, is like, well, it's probably a cop doing it.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's how you get away with it. And I've also seen a lot of true crime, and that seems to work out that way. Joe Kenda taught me this, but I mean, really, like that would work. And the fact that they play with that as a red herring and give you all the excuses to think this is the guy that's doing it because he's totally unhinged, but he's not. That's just his screwed up life. But I think they're playing off of that metaphor too, is that at least he is trying to wrangle in all of his anger and deal with all of that versus the taxidermist who isn't. He has these moments where he just totally unleashes the beast, if you will.
And that's a great thing about how the movie is structured and edited, because we do get this jangled perception of time from him. Every time you see John, it feels like he's lost time. It feels like he's coming out of a fugue state or something. And there's such a solid grasp of how to lure the audience into thinking, oh, well, he's having all these gaps of time. He's drinking again. He's forgetting things. He's waking up in broken glass, and he's always got these injuries, like he's putting the thing on his hand for his carpal tunnel or whatever. And he's picking up these, although we see how he kind of gets that injury, but he keeps seeming to wake up in incriminating states, so to speak.
That's just like such a trope of the werewolf movie too, is like that's what we see people that have the werewolf gene. That's where we see them, like after the full moon, they're always waking up and they with having no idea where they just were and like glass everywhere and stuff like that. So that's really what makes you think that he could be the wolf if it were a real wolf.
Yeah, I mean, that was the thing that happened to the Oz character on Buffy all the time. Was that, like, did he get out of his cage? We locked him up. He's constantly like there's all this back and forth about having to do that, and that you got to keep it caged in and all this stuff. And I fully expected us to like see him wake up and like have bloody hands or something at some point. Maybe they decided not to do that because it'd be too far. But I mean, he punches his own teeth out. I mean, this guy's got
that scene
problems.
Too is insane.
Yeah. When he loses it at the AA meeting, that's really intense.
Yeah.
He's very much walking this wire of being this character that's so full of rage, but also it's still being kind of funny. Mm-hmm. And maybe that says a lot about me, that I think it's kind of funny. But it's a really delicate balance. And the more I think about it, the more impressed I am about especially his acting performance, because this is not a likable character.
No.
And yet he's still appealing enough that you want to follow his journey, because you get a lot of movies with unlikable protagonists that are much more difficult to watch, much more difficult to follow along with, because you just decide, oh, I hate this guy, I hate this girl, I hate these people, let's just get rid of them. But the whole time you're watching John, I'm kind of rooting for him to like pull it together and solve this crime and to pull out of this downward spiral, because he's got these people that seem to support him and want him to be well, want him to do well. And even after he starts to like push them away and snap at them and all this stuff, they seem to just like want to be there for him.
Yeah. And I think there's two sides to read that for. One is that he's got the support system there for him if he wants to make real substantive changes in his life. But in some ways, the support system also enables all of his bad behavior, because nobody ever really calls him on it except his daughter. Finally, when she's making out with a boyfriend and they get attacked, and I don't know, the dude runs off, Brock, whatever his name is, like what a loser. But he runs off, and she's in the streets with no pants on or whatever, And dad is telling her, like, why are you breaking curfew and all this stuff when I'm out here hunting werewolves and all this, and doesn't even ask her how she is. And she calls him on it. And she just lays it all out. It's like you can tell that may have been like the most honest moment she ever had with him, and it clearly affects him. I mean, because he doesn't know how to talk to her anymore after that. And it's a powerful scene. It's played for laughs though. And that's the funny part, is they're using all the humor to get across this very serious subject matter.
It's definitely like a very interesting power shift too between them, because I feel like when you're a kid, obviously, if your parent is an alcoholic or your parent is mistreating you, like you can't really do anything about it. But once you get older, especially when you're a teenager, you can really kind of shift that dynamic, because like, what's he gonna do? Like she holds all the cards now because she could always like go with her mom or whatever. And so that was a really powerful scene where I felt like she was really, really setting that boundary with him, and in a way that she probably never had before.
I mean, yeah, completely. And I mean, and I love like her last line is like, you need to take me to the hospital. I'm bleeding from the skull. And she just slams the door. But the way she says that line, again, I'm like, such a off line, but it works because Chloe East just delivers that so well. And
yeah, it's a great delivery of that line. And it feels like this is that she's a girl who's had to kind of fend for herself, because neither one of her parents seems to be great at parenting. So it feels like this is not the first time she's had to say, all right, you need to fix me some dinner, or I need to go X place to do Y thing. Or in this case, I need to go to the hospital because I'm bleeding out of my skull.
Right. I mean, yeah, it's such a strange way of doing it. I'll tell you, though, the creepiest part of the movie, maybe at the end when they do the shot with the guy and he's supposed to be taller than he is and all that stuff. But the creepiest part for me is when the lady's in the diner with her daughter. And what we'll learn later is the guy sits there and he's just trying to chat her up, and you can see it just get,
oh my God,
really uncomfortable.
It's awful. And it's so like, you can tell that she knows that he's like icky and bad, and she calls the police, which is good, thank God. But oh my God, that scene causes you to be so uncomfortable. And if there's so much tension there and nothing really happens, which is what's really impressive about it. Like, you just know something bad is coming.
What gets me is on the rewatch, and I didn't notice it the first time, is when she's at the counter asking for the phone, you see his tall self just go behind her. And it's like, oh, that is just so eerie to think about, that he's just lurking out there.
I caught that on the first watch, and I just assumed that he had kidnapped the baby.
Oh.
Yeah.
But then again, I have a 2-year-old, so I assume something bad is going to happen to every child in every movie.
Right. I mean, but it's your lens, right? That gives you a different appreciation for it. Yeah.
I mean, when I watched it, it just felt so realistic, because I was like, this is a situation that so many women have to go through, like even on a daily basis, where weird men will just like follow you and ask you questions about yourself. Like, you owe them answers. And it's so degrading every time it happens, but it's like so normal that you wouldn't necessarily always call the police about it. So I don't know. The fact that she was able to do that, I was pretty impressed.
Yeah, but this movie's incredibly deliberate. Like that's in there for two reasons. Like functionally, it's in there to show us that this creepy monster stalks people, and so that's what he's doing here at this point. So she could have definitely been a victim at some point. But it's also to say, like, hey, you don't have to take that. Like, call the authorities. Like, just use the resources that are there. Like, you don't have to take that. Whether they take you seriously or not doesn't matter. Have your own power to go, like, no, I'm not. This guy's weird. Like, you need to know about this. So at least there's a trail of it, right? Which I appreciated that.
And even if you're not a woman, if you've got a small child with you, strangers will come up and talk to you, and it's terrible.
It's so weird. Like, what? Why?
And it's fine when they're just like, oh, she's cute, how old is she, blah blah blah. But when they like hang out and like try to talk, it's unsettling. Like, oh, what's her name? How old is she? Did she do this, that, and the other? It's like, I'm just like waiting in line for some coffee, lady.
Yeah.
Or you're old enough to be her grandfather, man. Just kind of give us some space. Or you are clearly a single childless man. Why are you here? I don't like you.
Yeah, I mean, your mind can run in a lot of different directions with that, right? And I think that's why that scene is staged the way it is, and why she's not alone in there. She's with her small child. Like it is that we got the double threat at the same time. Which makes this movie, werewolves a lot of times they're a metaphor for something. We've already talked about they can be a metaphor for sort of covering up like male rage and stuff like that, but they're often used as a metaphor for like untamed puberty and not figuring out how to deal with all that, right? This one has now taken it to a different place too. It's that the looming thing, the literal wolf at the door that no one notices is there the whole time. And that's the thing is this guy, the taxidermist is in almost every scene. He's just lurking around. And that's the true crime part of like, they always come back to their scene of their crime. And yes, this guy does.
And he's, like you said, he's there at every crime scene. And they always find a reason to cut to him or have him interacting with someone about something every time there's a new body. And so it's crazy that at least me, when I watched it the first time, I didn't connect that it was that guy. But I also didn't connect that the guy who owned the Airbnb was also the taxidermy guy. So maybe that was just seeing him in a different light or something.
Yeah, well, I wondered the same thing too, because I was like, wait a minute, is that the same guy? And on second watch, I caught it, but I was like, oh yeah, that's how he caught him, because he's talking about, can I go call my wife? And in the first scenes, in the interrogations, and then at the end, he's like, oh, I'm not married. And I was like, well, why is this in here? And I was like, oh, wait a minute. Oh, yeah.
Because he looks so much creepier in the taxidermy house than he does when he's just complaining behind the wheel of his SUV about not being able to rent his Airbnb out.
Yeah, and maybe it's just because I just saw the trailer for the new one, but I got this whole Texas Chainsaw vibe off that house. I was like, oh yeah, there's bone furniture in this house. Like, this is not good things happening.
Yeah, mother is up in the attic.
Right? Yeah. I was waiting for that. Like, yeah, he had a wife. She couldn't hack it. What a weird way to say that. Too. I was like, oh, he hacked her is what that means.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, like there's bodies all over. But again, they do all these weird red herrings again, because there's that guy in the wife beater with the wolf tattoo burning something in a brush pile, just randomly thrown in there. And I was like, am I watching a YouTube video? Like, who the hell is this guy? Like, he's nothing. He's nobody.
What is he burning that looks like a dead body?
That's what I wanted to know. Was he burning a body? Or was he burning like a deer carcass or something like that?
Well, it looked like a human butt.
Right? But I couldn't tell. It's just sort of random.
It could have also been like him burning
Maybe he was like a different serial killer.
That's a good theory. Maybe this is like a whole town of serial killers.
Yeah.
Because I kept expecting.
Or maybe he's one of the serial killers that like goes away and kills people other places, but he brought back a trophy or something.
Yeah, like that, like the guy in Alaska.
Yeah.
I kept expecting like Ricky Lindholm to be like the werewolf for some reason. I don't know why I kept thinking she's the one who does it. I think
that would be. Have you seen Werewolves Within?
I have not, and I wanted to catch it when it was on demand, but I never did.
That to me, this movie and that movie are like best friends in my mind, because they're very, very similar in the comedic horror werewolf, but that's an ending I think you'll like.
Now, I have played the game, but I don't know if
that might spoil it then, but
we do need to talk about Julia, though, the Ricky Lindholm character, because again, she is the only one that ever seems to really have a level head. She does actual police work at different times.
She's the only good cop.
Yeah, I think I'm not wrong. She's the only competent person in this whole town. Like, she should run the town. She shouldn't just be sheriff. She should be mayor at the same time. Like, but she's also completely overlooked all the time, which is hard to do because Ricky Lindholm's kind of tall and has a very striking look. She's not someone you just ignore. So casting her is, you're sort of hitting the nail on the head a lot. Like, see, you ignore even the most obvious answer in front of you. And there's that whole bit too where his dad's going like, look, you got to lead the team. You can't yell at them and all this stuff when they're having the bad staff meeting or whatever. And the camera just looks over at her and she's just sitting there going like, can I please just run this meeting? And, because they never, ever do it. And that's the idea, right? But I mean, I liked her. I liked the way she played that though, because she never came off as the stereotype, like, oh, there's that, that woman always just interrupting us and blah, 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 and all that stuff. She was very just cool, and she did her job, she did her role, and I thought she was fun, and she got a couple of good zingers in too, and I don't know, I got a kick out of it, and I did laugh too at the very end when she's pulling her ponytail. I had to cut a hole in it. They don't make ponytails for these. I'm like, they don't make trucker hats where you're from? I was like, oh, they're only custom fits, man. The sheriff's department's got some dough in Snow Hollow.
Yeah, they got the flex fit. It's nice.
I mean, right?
They're spending the money on that instead of actually doing any police work.
I mean, true. I mean, as we know, they should have all majored in computer science instead. Maybe we all should have. So, if we'd been smart, but oh well. Here we are. So, English major, communications major, film major. There we go.
See, that's why I thought she was going to be the werewolf. I was like, she's way too competent. She's got it too much together to not get away with.
Oh,
this.
She could have gotten away with it easily. Yeah,
we wouldn't know. Like, we would have no idea who the werewolf is.
She absolutely could have gotten away with something else, and we just don't know.
Yeah, maybe she was married to the serial killer burning the butt in the backyard. I don't know. Yeah. So we'll never know.
She's the guy with the wolf tattoo. Right.
I mean, it could be. I did like though that she does cruise up and she does save him. Because John. I mean, not only does he get stabbed, he gets like lifted up off the ground. Jason stabbed. And I was like, oh, we're going to get a real gory death here. But he lived from that? Are you kidding me? That was kind of wild.
Now, it takes a while to die from a stomach wound. So
yeah, clearly. Because but it was impressive. Like, again, if we haven't said it enough, the practical effects in this movie are amazing.
So good.
Even like the wolf suit, the wolf suit that you see throughout the movie is great. But at the end, when you see the taxidermy character wearing the wolf body, and he's doing the wolf noises and making the wolf faces, it's really intimidating. It's really scary. It's somehow more disturbing than seeing the full wolf mask slaying people. But the whole thing
because
itself,
it's a guy now. It's just some dude in like a suit, and that's so much worse in every way.
All I could think of was this is what M. Night Shyamalan should have done at the end of The Village, but instead of what we got. But
it just made me think, oh, this is the dark side of furries.
I mean, we have different perspectives here, clearly. So, but I mean, no, that is a great scene. That's why I said the second creepiest scene was the guy in the restaurant. The creepiest one is this ending, because when he goes total wolfo. And that, I mean, I was like, oh, this is even more unhinged than John is.
Will Madden absolutely killed that role, because I don't know how a human could do that. It was incredible.
Yeah, I was really impressed with how that went down. I wanted to see more of that, but I'm kind of glad that they just peppered it in. It was just enough. And I mean, and then he kills him good. And it's sort of a throwback to what the first victim's boyfriend or husband or whatever says, is like, when you get him, I want you to shoot him until he's dead. And he does. He shoots him a lot. And I was like, okay, but you know what? Good on you for listening to Sidney Prescott and all the Scream movies. You got to shoot him in the head a lot. We got to talk about this end, though, y'all, where John and Julia are dropping off the daughter at college. And again, there's obviously Jenna and John have a very strained relationship. We know this. Like, she's like, whatever, Dad, leave me alone, and Mom couldn't make it and all this. But the fact that he leaves her with condoms and her grandfather's pistol in the thing, and those two guys are coming up like, yeah, fresh meat, and he's just like, don't kill him, she'll do it for me. I'm like, what? This is so funny. Like, that is such a humorous beat to end this movie on, and the way she smiles, like, yeah. Like, that's, I work at universities. You can't have those in the dorm, kids. Like, you can't have a 38. I'm sorry.
You're not supposed to have them in the dorm.
Yeah, that's
good point.
You can. Yeah, no, I really liked that ending, because it kind of felt almost like he was trusting her more and like actually listening to what she had said before. And I was like, okay, this is good.
You mean when you went off to college, your parents didn't give you 3 condoms and a gun?
No, those two things they did not give me. And that's a surprise.
But no, I think that the whole idea is that, yes, he is trusting her more, but he sort of, the sigh, I felt like at first I was like, is he sighing because, oh, here's these horny dudes going after my daughter? Or it's more of like, I've given her everything she needs. Also, she's pretty tough, so I'm just going to go away now. And he sort of slinks off into the Morrow.
I feel like it's a little bit of both.
Yeah.
Thank God I don't have to worry about that for another, 16 years or whatever.
Yeah. Let's give Ron some more anxiety about his kid here tonight.
It was bad enough when they killed the 3-year-old, and that was terrifying. That was awful to me, and almost turned the thing off. But
yeah,
and then between Robert Forster dying of heart problems and them killing a toddler, it was a rough go for me.
It comes out of nowhere too. Like, you're not expecting it.
Yeah, I wasn't expecting either one of those things. I was expecting the toddler to be fine because that's how it works in movies. Mm-hmm. But it ties back to something we talked about very early in the podcast about how this movie sets things up and then doesn't give you the obvious. Like, they set up these kind of what could be played for comedy deaths, but then you get these gory death scenes. They set up that, the mom's going to die, but the kid's probably going to be okay. But no, they're both dead. And here's a little coffin. And, Robert Forster's got these heart problems, but he's probably going to be, oh, no, wait, he's going to die too. Yeah, it's just, it caught me by surprise at pretty much every turn. And I can't be pleased enough by that.
I mean, yeah, it is this subverting of expectations and then hitting you in the face with sort of some harsh reality and then capping it with a laugh. Like that's a very difficult thing to pull off. Like in writing, I can see how you can pull that off because there's good pieces of literature that do that and can do that for you. And I can even see a script that could do that, but actually getting that to translate to the screen, that's a different set of skill. And that's again why I'm interested in seeing where Jim Cummings goes next, because he's clearly got something. And we give this guy a real budget and some other actors and stuff. I'd be curious to see what he does and some real distribution. I mean, there's something to be had here, I think, for sure. We're definitely at the part of the podcast where it's time to give final thoughts, recommendations, and popcorn ratings. So what do we have here, Cory, from you for The Wolf of Snow Hollow?
Large popcorn. I really, really love this movie. And just the way that it's able to subvert every genre that's in it is so fascinating to me. And I think it's just a really cool piece. My recommendation for if you like this one, definitely watch Werewolves Within. Like I was saying, they came out at kind of the same time and they feel very, very similar. And I would also say Death Becomes Her, Cooties, and Jennifer's Body, just with the balance of comedy and horror, especially from a feminist angle. Those ones are great.
2 thumbs up on the Death Becomes Her, by the way. So that's
such an underrated movie.
Yeah, and another 2 thumbs up for Jennifer's Body. I love that movie.
It's one of my all-time favorites.
I will concur with Cory that this is a large popcorn movie. The more I thought about it and the more I went over it with you guys, the more I liked it. I find that horror comedy is like one of the hardest things to pull off, and even doubly so when it's this kind of extremely, very gory horror and this very like awkward kind of comedy. And yet this movie does it really well, and it's incredibly well written, and Jim Cummings is a great lead for this movie. I was very impressed by how he's able to pull off this character, and he's got a great supporting cast of people around him. But, there's 2 important things about a horror comedy. One, it's got to be funny. One, it's got to be a horror movie, and this is good at both of those. And that's really hard to pull off. So large popcorn.
Yeah, I'm going to say, like, when I watched this the first time, I was like, okay, that's a good solid medium popcorn. But at that second watch and catching all the subtlety of it again, I was like, oh, this is something way beyond. And then just taking into account what they had to work with, and this is what you came up with, it's pretty darn impressive. And it's like I said, it made me want to go, like, I want to see Thunder Road and this other stuff this guy's done, and I want to see where he goes next. And if you could do that, then you got me hooked. And so it's definitely large popcorn territory, because again, when you weave in all the really important and smart subtext into a movie without beating people over the head with it, and it's not that we don't need to beat people over the head with some of this stuff, but the way that's done is such a better way of delivering a message. And I really think this movie balances all that out. And the other thing too, is that this is a short one. Like, it does not require a lot of your time, but if you will give it the time, you will have a good time with it. So large popcorn for me as well. And glad you brought this one to us, Cory, because it's you never fail to deliver on the podcast, but definitely delivered on the movie for sure. So,
thank
Cory,
you for letting me pick. I was so excited to get to talk about it.
Absolutely. Well, like I say, you've dropped 3 or 4 in here. We're going to have you back on for now. So definitely, because we've never done a Meryl Streep movie at all, and Death Becomes Her might have to break that curse. So we'll get into that another day on Film Strip. So, Cory, tell folks again how they can follow you and all the cool things you're doing.
You can find me on my blog at gorycory.com. You can find me on Twitter at gorycoryhorror, and you can find me on Instagram at _gorycory_. And you can find my podcast, The Scream Teens, on the Anatomy of a Scream podcast network.
Awesome. Ron, what do you got going on at Den of Geek?
You can find me at Den of Geek. I'll be covering the second part of the last season of The Walking Dead, and I'll be just finishing up with Snowpiercer, and probably do some other stuff dropped in there, here or there. And, of course, you can always find me running the Film Strip Twitter account and trying to be funny and failing.
I would say you do a good job of being funny at that. And just so we can keep with the theme here on Film Strip, we're going to do American Werewolf in London next. So a couple weeks from now, we're going to break the can off of that one. I've only seen it once, and it was about 3 or 4 years ago. So that'll be a fun one to get into here on the show. You can always follow the show's social media at Film Strip Pod on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Find announcements about upcoming shows and Ron's great humor and all the other cool stuff that we're into, and a link to our Letterboxd page, which contains an entire list of all of our reviews. So if you're looking through the podcatcher and you go like, holy cow, did you guys ever cover this? Look on that Letterboxd page. There's a good chance that you'll find it there if we haven't, or you'll be surprised that we haven't done something, which always surprises folks. Go to filmstrippodcast.com. That's a link to our anchor.fm distribution site where you can find the podcast on the platform of your choice, Apple, Google, all the places we are there. Please rate the show where you're available and share the show on your social media. Leave us a positive review because it helps other people find the podcast. So for Cory and Ron, I'm Jay. Thank you for listening to Film Strip.
Thank you for listening to Film Strip. You can find more episodes on our website, filmstrippodcast.com. The Film Strip theme music is produced and performed by Frozen Lake 121. All content used or discussed in these podcast episodes is the property of the respective owners and used under the Fair Use Act, Section 504, C2, Title 17.